What's going on, everyone? My name's Tenebris, and in just about 2 weeks, it'll be Generation Zero's 4th anniversary. And safe to say, we've been through a lot in these 4 years. So today, I thought we could take a trip down memory lane and look at all of the major updates that have come out so far for Generation Zero. Now, let's travel with the time machine back to 2019, to the first update we ever saw, the aptly titled April Update. This was the first step Generation Zero took from its day one patch towards ensuring it would become the game it deserves to be. This update solved a number of early exploits in the game, but more importantly added a stamina bar to the screen so we could see how much stamina we were using. And a given is that each update has tons of bug fixes. Since the beginning, Generation Zero's efforts in bug fixing have been monumental. Each update we see upwards of almost 100 fixes. We won't go into details and focus more on features than fixes, but these fixes addressed a huge amount of day one bugs. Then we had one of my favorite updates to this date, the May update, and with it, photo mode. A feature I still use in every single video, and one of the best content creation features we've seen since launch. Photo mode is a gem, and shows Generation Zero off in the best of ways. This update also had a lot of smaller changes to it. The skill screen got a revamp, the PVG got iron sights, loot got changed up alongside a bunch of other small tweaks and options added to the game. The loot changes were probably the biggest in this update. Before this, we could farm everything infinitely, but this put time limits to loot refreshing and made pickup items a one-time pickup in the game world. Then we had the June update, where we saw the introduction of the ever-classic cycles, the first vehicle added to Generation Zero, and one that you either love or you hate. But the main thing it does is it gets you from point A to point B, and offered a few collectible skins to customize your bike with. This update also overhauled a massive amount of loot in the game to make it work in a way that makes much more sense, and offered more overall as loot was very scarce in the early days of Generation Zero's launch. This update's fixes had a huge focus on fixing up broken missions and did a great job fixing the main campaign as well as a bunch of side missions. Now for another one of my personal favorite updates, the August update, and with it came the introduction of the Plundra, our very own personal storage box. Up until then, the only way to store extra gear was to drop it on the ground, then jump in as a mule character and pick it up. So if any of you dudes out there use mule characters like I do, then you're using something that was borderline essential to do at launch. This update addressed even more issues with side missions, as well as a bunch of various gameplay tweaks that led up to another massive amount of bug fixes. These early updates had some seriously pressing issues to address, and so these early fixes were some of the most dire in the early days, with frequent hotfixes. This was when I'd say Generation Zero was more of a diamond in the rough, rather than the actually fantastic game that we have nowadays. We then had an update in September. In this update, we saw the introduction of the challenge tree, something that's grown alongside the game to be a very fleshed out and rewarding experience, offering some of the best cosmetic items in the game and a really solid challenge along the way. This update was much smaller, but that was due to the team gearing up for the next couple of updates that were actually frickin' huge in retrospective. We then had a huge update in October, adding in rivals and experimental weapons. We got 6 new experimentals and the ability to challenge even more difficult machines. It's a feature that is integral to the game now, and is one of the main examples of a feature being fully flushed out here in GZ, with rivals nowadays offering so much loot on top of their experimental weapons. This again had a small list of bug fixes to accompany it, as what was to come next is easily the biggest thing to ever happen in Generation Zero's lifetime. And that was Alpine Unrest, Generation Zero's biggest DLC to date, and the only off-map location that's been opened up so far. Alpine Unrest opened up the island of Himfell for us to explore and find answers on, offering one of the best DLC experiences in the game. This DLC also brought two new base game weapons in the form of the KVM 59 and 89, and all around was such a solid DLC that it's left us wanting more ever since. Then, jumping ahead to 2020, we saw one of the smaller updates for Generation Zero along the way, with the January update. This was primarily focused on rebalancing the Rivals experience, as weapons had dropped too easily and frequently before that, and locking experimental weapons behind level 25. There was also the introduction of reloading while sprinting, which was a huge change to how combat flows. Then came the February update, another smaller update, but this was the first time that Semla was made available in the game to gather. There were also improvements made to characters in third person, and a challenge tree added for Alpine Unrest. It's now March 2020, and with that came the first anniversary update, and this was another really big update, bringing the first of crafting, a huge inventory change, difficulty options, and the first of the world revamps in the archipelago. For crafting, we saw the introduction of apparel schematics, which added bonuses and buffs to the clothing you wear, and was the start of one of the best features Generation Zero's added so far. The long-awaited introduction of crafting stations was equally well met by the community. The inventory change was massive too, changing from the grid inventory to the list-based inventory we have today. And then came the difficulty options, which gave the opportunity for players to customize their experience in game with 3 difficulty options: Adventure, Skirmish, and Guerrilla. This anniversary update was monumental, not only for what it did, but how it set things in place for the future. Then April rolled around, and with this one came a smaller update aimed at flushing out the new inventory system, pretty much just adding over-encumberment penalties to the game. There were also some tweaks to machine AI. Now harvesters can call in hunter reinforcements for us to fight it out with. A few months later in June, we saw the second major DLC for GZ, Phoenix Rising. Though not as widely loved as the island expansion of Alpine Unrest, Phoenix Rising was still praised for how it handled storytelling elements and expanded on the game's lore, with the changes to Phoenix becoming near iconic at this point. This update also introduced melee weapons and a handful of smaller changes and tweaks. Melee weapons were a welcome addition to the game and brought a new and fun way to fight it out with the machines. Then, about 5 months later in November, we saw the introduction of the first boss machine, the Reaper. This update also brought Phoenix Rising to PS4 after a short set of delays. The Reaper brought the experimental sledgehammer as a unique drop, and overall was just a great addition to the game, offering the challenge a lot of us are seeking in Generation Zero. We also saw revamps across the farmlands, bringing much more interesting locations to explore, as well as an expansion to crafting for medkits and ammo, which had been much awaited at that point, and was what we had all hoped for from crafting from the very beginning. We then had a very small update before the holidays in December, adding more POIs to the farmlands and a bunch of small things like toggleable heartbeat sounds, melee weapons having a charge indicator, directional signs and bunkers, and a few other small tweaks. This update also added the American Weapons Pack, our first weapons DLC, adding in 3 new weapons. Weapon DLC would take the role of regular content for us to purchase for the next while here in GZ's lifetime. Now skipping ahead to February 2021, in this update we saw a much requested feature of daily activities for Generation Zero with the introduction of assignments. This feature has been a work in progress since its introduction, but is mostly up to snuff these days, with most assignments tracking and completing properly. There were also improvements to how saved games are backed up, and the final touches to the farmlands in this update. Then, the last update we had in 2021 was the Resistance update. This is up there as another one of Generation Zero's biggest updates, introducing the hugely requested base building, one of the best features to get added so far to the game in my books, as well as experimental ammo and medkits, which are some of the most essential late-game items in GZ. This update brought with it the second weapons pack, which is one of my personal favorites, the Soviet weapons pack. Resistance was an incredible update overall, but sadly faced some heavy issues on Xbox and was delayed until later on that year in December. So now with all platforms up to par, we saw 2022 start in the strongest way a year started yet, with the Landfall update in February. One of the most requested things since the game's launch was more machines for us to fight, and Landfall answered this with not one, but two machines for us to fight, the Soviet-made Lynx and the Wolf. This update heavily focused on the Soviets making landfall, but also brought more world revamps and set pieces to both the forest region and the marshlands, as well as introducing the weapon wheel, gatherable wood from trees, storage expansions, and a new intro movie to the game. Then to wrap it all up, we got our first expansion to base building with a free pack and a paid pack. The free one offered new simple structures, while the paid pack offered new storage and defense structures. Landfall was a monumental effort after a tough year, and got Generation Zero back on track to its routine of regular updates. So following up then in April, we saw the next update of the year with the Base Assault update, adding in even more to flush out the open world of GZ. This added procedurally generated bases for Phoenix, which we could fight and take over to build our own new bases, offering not only a new open world repeatable activity, but also a huge expansion to the base building system from the Resistance update. Then, on top of that, we saw new revamps to the marshlands, as well as the first few new free missions added since the game's launch, with a short story following the Soviet narrative from the Resistance's perspective. We also got a bunch of Soviet buildables for our bases, adding in a new tier of structures built out of concrete, offering a late game to base building for the more difficult wave defenses. With two huge updates, 2022 moved on with the best pace we've ever seen Generation Zero take, with yet another huge update in June, this time called the New Dawn update. This update will go down as probably one of the only few updates I really won't enjoy in Generation Zero, excluding the crafting changes. So, to me, this wasn't exactly the best update, but it was still entirely commendable seeing the introduction of NPCs to Generation Zero's main questline, something that had been long requested by the community. Though this update wasn't all doom and gloom, we saw the max level cap increased from 31 to 10,000, a skill respec system, new farmland control points, a revamp to Hagaboda, and the ever-enjoyable tactical equipment pack. Hagaboda's revamps have been some of my favorite revamps done to a city so far in GZ. It's incredibly well done now that it's pretty much finished up. Then, in August, we saw a smaller update with the Recon update. This made a small rebalance on crafting, added new control points to the South Coast, and updated some early game missions to include dialogue from the newly introduced NPCs. But the year was far from over, and in October we saw the introduction of yet another new machine, the Firebird. Dark Skies was a great update, adding in not only a new threat to the skies, but a new way to travel with the tuned moped, and something that I personally vouched for in the game, weapon skins. And to top it all off, there was the introduction of new game worlds, allowing for us to play through the game in New Game Plus or start over completely with a fresh character. Dark Skies was an incredibly well-rounded update, offering new threats, new ways to customize ourselves, and new reasons to play again. And for our second last update to cover, the Dangerous Experiments update. Again, being one of the few updates I haven't personally enjoyed. This update brought a huge nerf to crafting, 3 new experimentals, and a few new collectibles that sadly didn't work quite right. There was also the introduction of the crafting tree that streamlines the process of unlocking schematics to craft, which I think overall was a really great introduction for crafting. I'm really hoping the team will reassess this update soon, as the crafting changes still kinda suck, and it would be great to see that being a useful thing in our games again. Oh, and how could I almost forget the epic conclusion to the Apple murder mystery that had been growing in various set pieces across the map, This was also a brand new mission added to the game in the December update. And for our most recent update, the smaller February update of 2023, adding in new free weapon skins, a new collectible alongside a fix for the older collectibles, flushing out the recent skin pack with a few more skins, and a few more smaller tweaks like a new introduction to base building and changes to the main menu screen. With what? Something like 23 updates, not including hotfixes? It's safe to say the effort made for Generation Zero since its launch, and pardon my French, but it's been fucking incredible, man. And it's mental that this game is still so slept on. But the one thing is that the Generation Zero community grows stronger with each and every year, and these updates are the reason why it grows stronger. The efforts made by the Generation Zero team are monumental, and the progress made up the mountain of potential for this game has been beyond strong. With the 4th year anniversary coming up soon, I hope you're all as excited as I am for what the future will hold for Generation Zero. But for now, it's been really nice to reminisce on the past. So, thank you for watching this retrospective on the past 4 years of Generation Zero's development, and I will catch you all in the next one. Until then, peace.